Joining me today is Brian Prechtel. Brian, please take a minute or two to introduce yourself, what orchestra you're a member of, and the work that you do.
Thanks for having me, Laura. I am a percussionist in the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra. I've been here for 18 years. Before that, I was in the Fort Wayne Philharmonic, the Columbus Symphony, the Toledo Symphony. I kind of bopped around. And I also am a composer and a teaching artist as well.
Okay, wonderful. How have you benefited from being a symphonic percussionist?
Well, I think that one of the great things about choosing this path early was that it exposed me to really high-level teaching and pedagogy. All of the people I studied with were people that really were very active in the orchestral world, and so there's kind of like a family almost, and it's sort of like a pedigree that gets passed down, from Bill Street, say, to Charlie Owen, then to Mike Udow and Alan Abel, and you sort of get really consistently high levels of instruction, and you become part of a family of people. So that's one of the best things, is the training. The other thing that's really great is the work ethic. You just can't possibly be successful in this business without developing a really strong work ethic. And, that comes over time. And it also comes being exposed to a lot of other people that have a really strong work ethic, especially if you get into a small studio where everybody's very focused. There's that competitive instinct that kicks in. And I remember when I was at Temple studying with Alan Abel, and he would just calmly say, "Oh, yeah, Greg Zuber's been practicing about 6 to 8 hours a day." And you would go, "Oh, man." And you would be practicing 6 to 8 hours a day, because you realize that's kind of what it takes. So those two things, I think, really stand out. The other thing that I think I would highlight that I got out of being an orchestra percussionist is learning how to get up after getting knocked down, because the audition process is really difficult and in some ways demoralizing if you let it. And you got to learn the value of getting up, and learning to value that you're continually putting yourself in a vulnerable place when you put yourself through an audition and that rigorous process.
Oh, yeah, I completely understand that. It was very, very much. All right. What have you most enjoyed about working in the symphonic field?
I think a lot of the things that I mentioned above, in terms of being part of a family, and that family is, the larger percussion family around the world, really, because I feel like I have a kinship with percussionists everywhere I go, and not just orchestra percussionists, all kinds of percussionists. It does feel like you're in a family. There is that family that I just mentioned, that sort of pedigree family that I came through, which is coming down through Eastman and through the Philadelphia Orchestra School. So you're part of that family. And also, it's just the environment. There's a family that you work in every day, which is your colleagues in your percussion section and in the whole orchestra. And all of you get to experience this incredibly fantastic literature. I mean, time sort of tests the repertoire. And so over time, the pieces that have lasted, that you get to play over and over, are phenomenal. Plus, the orchestras I've been in have actually been at the forefront of playing some of the new music that's coming out. So you're getting to see some of the really great composers that are on the scene now, whether it's Jennifer Higdon or Sean Shepard or Kevin Putz, John Adams, all those kind of people. We get to see their pieces when they're new. And that's really exciting too. So those are some of my favorite things.
Awesome. That's great. All right. What does your current career, let me rephrase. Does your current career meet your personal and financial expectations?
Well, I've been very lucky because I have been able to be employed, since I got out of school. I mean, the first job I went was in the San Jose Symphony, and it was like a part-time position. But I didn't care. I was going to be working in the field, and I packed up my car and I started driving to San Jose. I won another job along the way, and I never made it to San Jose. I started playing the Toledo Symphony, and from there I've had jobs. I've never been unemployed. I've gone through some work stoppages, but I've never been unemployed. So I consider myself incredibly lucky. But still, it's a little crazy considering how competitive it is to get a job in this field, that the pay really isn't high when you compare it with a starting engineer or a computer science major, but again, we get paid in other ways. And for me, the satisfaction of going to work and doing something I love every day, you just can't put a price on that. So I consider myself incredibly lucky. But we do have to stop as a culture and start thinking, what are we paying for? Because the arts are something we should be supporting more systematically, just like our teachers. We should be supporting more systematically. Let's really talk about underpaid people. The
Yeah.
teachers that shape our children's lives are incredibly undervalued when it comes to financial compensation, if you ask me.
Oh yeah, I know. My husband's a band director.
Yeah, crazy.
So I get it.
Yeah.
All right. Next question. You've developed some special career interest and skills outside of the symphonic percussion area. So, what are these interests and skills, and how have they developed into a significant career component to you?
Right. The other two areas that are on my business card are composer and teaching artist. And I started composing back in the 90s just because, I just didn't think there was enough chamber music for percussion out there. So I just started writing things that I wanted to play. And it has been really rich experience for me. And I have over 30 pieces now. And, some of them are getting performed and recorded. And it's been very fulfilling to do that. And I learn a lot about myself through the process, and so that's been very rich. But I would say that is the teaching part of my sort of the constellation of things that I do that has been the most surprising and really the most enriching. And of course, we're all teaching artists in that we teach students, and I do teach students that are really serious about the orchestra field and want to take orchestra auditions. But actually, far more of my time is a teaching artist in underserved communities. We have a program called Orchids that we run out of the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra, which really aims to be a program of social change for underserved communities. So it's a lot of Black and brown children that come to the program. But actually, I've been working in underserved communities before I ever got to the Baltimore Symphony Orchestra. I mean, I started 30 years ago before there was any of these programs. And I like to call myself the OG of bucket band, the original gangster, because I was teaching bucket band 30 years ago. And there's an interesting story about that. I was called up when I was in the Fort Wayne Philharmonic. I get this phone call from this woman. She says, "I'm Brenda Robinson, and I have an after-school program at a YMCA, and I'd like to have some music." And I thought, "Oh, great." I said, "Yeah, I could probably help you with that." That's one of the things I teach my students. If anybody ever asks you if you could do something, just say yes, and then figure it out. That's how you build a successful career. That's a little secret. But I said, "Sure. How much money do you have, Brenda?" And she said, $800. And I said, "Oh, okay. Well, let's see. Why don't we get some 5-gallon buckets and some drumsticks, and let's see what we can do." And that's how we started. And at first I was like, I don't really know what I'm doing here. But my wife at the time was a Suzuki teacher, and I had seen how she was teaching, and I thought this would work for buckets. And I basically started this whole concept of teaching bucket band by rote, of course, because none of these kids could read music. And that really wasn't, that's the beauty of teaching in this way. Kids can play immediately. There's just sort of an immediate feedback and immediate gratification for being able to make sound. But it was incredible what happened in a very short amount of time. I mean, the skills that this ingrains in young musicians. I mean, it teaches them about inner pulse. It teaches them about working as a team. It teaches them how to listen and fit in, and how to handle themselves with a bunch of people in a room, self-discipline, and it teaches them to make goals that are more long lasting than moment to moment, because we would start sort of, it first started with playing games. A lot of the teaching I do is through the games I play with them, and then we started writing pieces, and the pieces were really great. It was amazing what we were able to achieve, and it really started impressing people. And before you know it, people are writing checks, and they're like, "Oh yeah, let's support this." And then we had drum sets, and that program just really blossomed. And so when I got to here in Baltimore, and Marin also wanted to start, this program here called Orchids. I said to the fellow who was running it, Dan Trey, I said, well, you got to have a bucket band. He's like, oh, bucket band. You told me about that. And he said, do you think we can do that? I said, sure, we can do it. And we started, and now it's become a big, actually teaching tool that's being used all across the country. The El Sistema model that grew up in Venezuela, has been adapted all over the country, and now there's this El Sistema sort of network of teaching locations all across the United States, Canada, actually all across the world, and many of them use Bucket Band as a teaching tool. And many of them use my book. You can get Bucket Band Basics, which is a teaching guide for. It's a step-by-step sort of guide for teaching artists on my website, fractalmusic.com. Go check it out.
Wonderful. Thank you. That sounds like a lot of fun. Uh, I actually I kind of want to tag on to that. How much time do you spend like in a week or a month on between your symphony work and your um
Well, I
and
mean,
I
the
guess
symphony
your other
schedule
work?
is pretty standard. We have
Right.
4 rehearsals and 3 or 4 concerts a week. So that's a pretty steady schedule. And you know how it is. You usually have Mondays off, and then you go in on Tuesday, and you might have one or two rehearsals. You usually have 2 rehearsals on Wednesday, a rehearsal on Thursday, and then you have a Thursday night concert, Friday night concert, Saturday night concert, Sunday afternoon concert. I mean, that's a sort of a standard week. It changes with pops and other things.
Hmm.
And then I go over to Orchids when I finish at the BSO, and I am usually over at Orchids 3 to 4 days a week. And
Okay.
there's 5 different sites, so I go to different ones, and I actually not only do I teach the bucket band, but I help out with the concert band, like conducting the concert band and the orchestra, and we're trying to help raise standards across the site. So I probably put in, maybe 12 extra hours a week doing that. It just depends from week to week. It changes.
I guess with these jobs that you're doing, did you have to develop or acquire any new skills?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Okay.
Because I was doing this work so long ago, there weren't a lot of other people doing it, and so most of the training I got at that time was sort of on the job training. Um, uh, you know, and these days through the El Sistema program and a lot of social justice work, there's a lot of training that you can get. So I kind of figured this out as I went along. The first thing I did really was through watching my spouse do Suzuki work. I was like, oh, okay, I see how Suzuki works, and I kind of developed this teaching by rote system. Yeah, but what I really had to learn, and the hardest thing about doing this work, is classroom management skills, and that's really important because imagine, uh, you know 15 kids with buckets and drumsticks, young kids that are not used to classroom management necessarily, and you you want to make it fun for everybody, but there has to be some order in the classroom. And so I had to develop a whole system of teaching them what rest position was, and being just a stickler for the fact that when I said, bucket band rest position, and we clicked our sticks, it was silent. And and I do this thing where I make sure we click together. So that's one way to get them to refine their listening skills and their watching skills, their attention paying, being mindful. And I wouldn't go on until it was one click all together and it was silent. And you really have to you gotta ingrain that. So that's a tough thing. And I had to learn a lot about social psychological awareness. I mean, a lot of the kids I teach in some of these underserved communities are, they're in traumatic circumstances, and so there's a lot of trauma informed teaching and social justice awareness that you get over time. Now we have professional development that really focus on that. The other thing other skill I had to get was how to develop group composition. That's a very difficult thing because it's fine if you go in and I'm a composer, so I could just compose the pieces and say, here's the piece. But you get a lot more buy-in if the students are actually a big part of the composition process. And so, I would actually incorporate that. And I would notate things for them. Like, they couldn't necessarily read it, but I'd go up to the chalkboard and say, okay, this is what you're playing. Okay, and also help me remember it because I'm coming next week and I'm like, what was it we were playing? They can always seem to remember, but it would be helpful for me to have it written down. And then we would add another part that complemented that. And that's a whole negotiating sort of set of skills because sometimes not every idea can stay in the piece, and you got to like sort of say, let's try something else. And there's a whole lot of sort of emotional baggage that can come with it, that rejection when you don't get to have your idea in at that moment. But look, this is, they're proud of the pieces, and sometimes as composers we know, not everything stays on the page.
Very
So
nice.
those are I'd say some of the key skills.
Okay, great. What age range of kids do you typically work with?
Well, the great thing about this is that you can start quite young. I mean, much younger than in the El Sistema programs. Actually, they put instruments in Venezuela in kids' hands as young as 5 and 6 years old. That's tough for some instruments, just like to reach the trombone. You can't even get out to those positions, or the bass, or the cello. Larger instruments just don't fit.
Hmm.
Small kids, but I think kids even as young as 4 and 5 can hold the sticks and sit on the bucket. Now you spend a lot of time trying to get the kids to learn to sit on the buckets and stay on the buckets, and
Yeah.
bathroom breaks and all the things that go into that. So you can start quite young. Um, but there's sort of a sweet spot to me, which is sort of like about second to fifth grade, where that's a great place to start. And then through middle school, they can get quite good. I mean, some of the things that I have a performance bucket band, which is
Hmm.
the high level bucket band. We have a lot of teaching bucket bands that are very, are used for beginner kids. But then they can work their way up to the performance group. And some of the stuff we play is extremely complicated and challenging from Chop's point of view. These kids have hands and they have great concepts, and we have been able to achieve some amazing things.
Wow, that's great. That's awesome.
Yep.
Very cool. So, I actually wanted to ask, what inspired you to want to get very involved with this particular, not only with the bucket bands, but also work kids? And was there something
You
specific,
know,
or?
it first of all, as I said earlier, I have built my entire career on the premise that if someone asks you if you can do something, say yes and then figure out how. So that's just my general approach to things. And there's a lot of anxiety that I feel when I go into these new things. I remember that came the first time someone asked me to be a band director and or do anything like that. But I have found that time and time again, these new situations are very rewarding. When I started working with underserved communities, it just awakened something in me that I didn't know was there. That I think I grew up in a very sort of middle class, comfortable, affluent environment, really, and you get sort of blinded by that in a way because you don't realize what it's like to grow up in an environment where there is so much want and there's so many things that are just not going to happen, and to bring something that really enriched my life and was just such a refuge for me to these kids who had so much more need for that than I ever had was just incredibly powerful. And so I loved doing it. It's very challenging. Group teaching is very challenging. I mean, you come out of there exhausted, but the rewards are just tower over some of the other experiences I've had. And so I just have found that it just feels incredibly worthwhile and important to me to feed back in like this.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That's great. Um, do you happen to have any funny stories that you might
Oh,
want to
there's
share?
lots. Well, one of the I guess one of the best stories is I had one student who was definitely on the autism spectrum. I mean, there was no doubt about it, and you have a lot of kids that come in. You don't know, where they are. I mean, well, I'll tell one story about what goes into this work, and then I'll continue with this story about my student Aaron. But I remember going into Brenda Robinson at the old Fort YMCA in Fort Wayne and saying, "Brenda, we got a problem with Antron. He is not behaving. He is disturbing the class. He's got so much talent, but this just can't go on. We need to get his parents in here. We need to get a psychologist in here, and we got to have a conference." And she said, "Brian, that's not going to happen." And I said, "Well, I know his mother. She has 4 other children, and she works 2 jobs. And there is no father in this picture, and there is no psychologist." I said, "Well, what are we going to do?" She said, "We're going to solve this problem." I said, "Okay." And so you learn that you have to take on a lot of different roles other than teacher. So I learned that early on, before there was all this training now that we're getting. But I remember with Aaron in particular, when he was younger, he was on the spectrum clearly, and there were just interpersonal problems with him and the other kids. And he was super talented, but he would just freak out, and he would kind of lose it in the classroom. And I was like, "Aaron, come on, come with me." And he would come out in the hallway with me. Luckily, I had someone else who could kind of monitor what was going on in the room. And I go out to Aaron. I said, "Aaron, what's going on here?" And he just slumped down and was just lying on the floor. I was like, standing over and talking, I'm like, "Aaron, come on, you need to be in this." And before I knew it, I was lying on the ground next to Aaron. And I'm like going, "All right, so we can lie down here." We're looking up at the ceiling. I said, "This is okay." And we sat there, and I said, "We can do this. We can do this every day. But is this really what we should be doing here?" And it took a while. Eventually, Aaron came back in the classroom, and it wasn't over. It wasn't solved in that moment. Trust me, it took years. But now Aaron I just saw him the other day. He's back from his first year at a local college down in Southern Maryland, and he's a grown up man now with.
Wow.
And he's worked through those difficulties. And, I have to think that Bucket Band and the Orchids program was a big part of that for him. So, there's a lot of rewards.
That's awesome. That's great. Okay, well, 2 more questions. Do you have any words of wisdom? You've actually given us a lot of good nuggets of words of wisdom throughout the conversation, but do you have maybe something?
I guess I would say that when you do work like this, people want to say it's selfless, and it really. I have gained so much more from doing this work than these students have ever gained from me. I mean, I learned a lot about myself. I found stories of compassion, patience, ingenuity. I didn't know I had any of those qualities. I certainly don't always display them with my own children when they were growing up, or the loved ones in my life. But for some reason, in this setting, it was necessary. And so, the way you grow as a person from doing this work is incredibly valuable, and an appreciation for humanity, and the value of working in communities that are different than your own, in Black and brown communities, when I didn't grow up in that, and I didn't work in those in most of my life. And so in the last year, when we have, there's been sort of a reckoning going on across the country about racism since the death of George Floyd, and in our business too. And I think that, I just have a much shorter journey to go than maybe some do in understanding all of that because of this work. So I think that I see it from a very selfish point of view. I've seen all the ways that I've benefited. So I can just recommend that if you want to grow, get out there and start feeding back all the great things that have been given to you as a member of the percussion family.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Last thing, how can people get in touch with you?
Oh, that's easy. You can go to practalmusic.com, or you can just write me, brian@practalmusic.com. And I'm sure you can see my name right there on the screen. It's a little weird, PRECHTL, but you can find me that way. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram. I'm easy to find.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much, Brian. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Yeah, thanks for the time.